Carolyn, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to talk about your debut novel, The Fortunes of Jaded Women, and to hear more about your story, your process, and really what's next. My name is Maybelle, and I'm so glad to meet you. And I'll just give a quick two-line summary of what I've read about the book and how it starts off with a Vietnamese woman, a witch, and a curse. And then we fast forward generations later to see what happens to this curse with a cast of women. And so maybe for those people out there that haven't read it yet, would you expand more on what that story is about?
Yes. And thank you again so much for having me. I've been a huge fan, and I'm so grateful that you guys have picked The Fortunes of Jaded Women, my debut book for your book club pick. But my name is Carolyn again, and The Fortunes of Jaded Women. It's really about an estranged Vietnamese American family of women who sort of all believe that they've been cursed to never experience love or happiness. And I've decided to set the setting in Little Saigon in Orange County, California. I grew up in Orange County, and I've never really seen a contemporary Vietnamese American family story set in Little Saigon. Typically, it is geared more towards the war, and I really wanted to focus a contemporary book about a multi-generational POV story that shifts between a really large cast of characters, and there's over 14 Vietnamese women in this book through three different generations, and they sort of deal with the aftermath of the curse. And like you mentioned, there's a witch at the beginning who is kind of like a psychic that they meet, who predicts that there will be 3 predictions for the family throughout the year. So there's going to be a death, a marriage, and a wedding, and the women have to deal with the fallout of those predictions.
Great. Yes, it was such an entertaining story for me to go through. One of the things that I love too is that there are pieces of it that is based in Seattle, and I know you have a connection there. What is it, Carolyn?
So yeah, I grew up in Orange County, but I actually have lived in Seattle for close to a decade. So I know it pretty intimately well. I went there for undergrad, I stayed for grad school, and then I worked in tech for a very long time. So some of my, you can find little Easter eggs in the book about my comments about tech. I was there through the Amazon burst of the boom in Seattle. So I saw everything there. And yeah, so I just have little comments about tech. There's a character named Priscilla who dates a guy named Mark, and it's Priscilla Chan and Mark Zuckerberg. So very kind of cheeky, kind of tones of tech and that type of relationship.
I would have never put that together until you said it.
Oh, really?
But now I was like, oh, duh.
Yeah. I just I just been in tech for so long that I have so many inner thoughts.
I imagine. I mean, the relationship there with Priscilla and Mark. One of the things that I've already posted about is just that I myself have a little bit of a connection to Priscilla, having worked in tech for most of my career in Seattle, and I've seen those relationships come and go. But I'd love to hear, who do you probably most connect with in your story?
Oh gosh. It's funny how I wrote the characters. Yeah, it's some is influenced by my friends and their love lives, but also I made sure to have a little piece of myself in each character. What's that Pixar movie with little girl who can't control her emotions? And she has, I
know the names of the characters, but I'm totally blanking on the name of the movie.
Yeah, there's anger, happiness, those
joy.
Characters. I had that for, I made sure to include a bit of myself in each of these characters. But I probably identify the most with the middle sibling, Twee.
Okay.
Yeah. Who has commitment issues. But I'm engaged, so I don't
Congratulations.
I don't have those commitment issues anymore.
But maybe back in your 20s.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, back in
Okay.
my 20s.
Fair
yes.
enough. Not now, future partner.
Yeah.
And so one of the questions that came from one of our readers is really they wanted to know about, we'll stick with the story for the book for a sec, is parallels of your own life. And so we kind of just talked about the characters, but are there other parallels, like in terms of your family dynamics that we would see in the book?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that when I wrote it, it is a very Vietnamese American experience. And I think when people read it at first, they thought maybe it was like, I mean, obviously it's like exaggerated, right? But you know, Vietnamese people do tend to hold grudges for a very long time to like their deathbeds, right? And so I have seen family members like fight for 10, 20 years over one thing and they won't let it go. You know, it's there's probably a lot of things that contribute to that. You know, obviously being war, refugee immigrants, right? You don't really have a lot of stability. And so when people fight here, like those fights are like so exacerbated, you know? And so that is, I have seen that happen a lot within my family dynamic. And so, but it's not just uncommon to mine. I've seen it happen to a lot of Vietnamese families I know where like the fighting is so intense. And
Mhm.
so I did really want to capture it. I do think it's a very like specific thing where, you know, grudges can be held for a very long time.
Yeah, I still can't get the visual of my head where the sisters go at it with the oranges. Like,
Yeah. I
so
actually had a reader message me being like, my aunt actually got in a fight in that exact same like
what?
cafe. Yes. And I was like, oh, well, I made that up, but you know, that's like, I'm so sorry.
Wow. That's bananas. Okay. One of the things that I also heard you just say is really just like the grudges, but also like there's a piece of like superstition that runs through like the storyline too. And I wonder, like, I'm Filipino, but I moved here to the Seattle area when I was 3. But like my immigrant parents, they have a lot of superstitions they carry over. And again, that storyline throughout this story. And I'm wondering, in a Vietnamese American family, like what kind of superstitions you had to follow or to work with when you were growing up.
Oh my gosh. There's so many. I felt like it's so interesting that like I'm not religious, but you know, my family's Buddhist. My mom is very Buddhist. And so there's just so many things that sort of like we had this like family. My mom has this like you know those like calendars you get from the Asian grocery supermarket, whatever. There are certain dates that she abides by in which you cannot leave the house because you know it's like super like dangerous to leave the house,
Okay.
you know. So it's like, you know, those things I've had to like grow up with my entire life. And like she would take me to like the family fortune teller.
That's a
Everybody, I
real
feel like every
thing.
family, yeah, I feel like every family has a family fortune teller. And honestly, the woman in the book, the psychic in Hawaii, I base it off a real person. So in Oahu, there is a very famous Vietnamese psychic who a lot of people know from the mainland who she is, and everybody on the island knows this woman. Yeah, if you Google her, like it's the first thing that pops up. Yeah, and so I did model the entire origin of the book after this woman, but I changed all facts, so please don't sue me. You know, I changed a different island, all this stuff, but yeah, like she is a very real person, and I know people who would fly in to see her once a year.
Wow. Is that something that you
Yeah.
continue to do? You said you've seen her once. Is that somebody you see? Is it like an annual
Uh,
event?
Uh, sorry, my dog just saw the FedEx guy. It's I don't like I only saw her once in my life when I was like 27. So this is like a while. Do you see my dog?
I
Yeah,
do. Just
I
little
saw
ears.
her like yeah, I saw her when I was like 27. This is like a long time ago. So I don't recommend yeah. I saw her once and that was like
If
good
that was
enough
good
for
enough for
me.
you.
Yeah, it was very, I mean, I've told this story before in different like interviews about the book. And I talked about her on like my Good Morning America interview, but she is the one who predicted when I would write the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she predicted like all this other stuff about my love life, how many books I'm going to write in my lifetime, and like all
Yeah.
this other crazy stuff. And I just thought she was so, yeah, she's really scary in that sense. So I don't recommend it unless you're really interested in that. But yeah, it's I grew up with it my entire life. My mom would take me to go see fortune tellers. When I got engaged, my fiance, who's Vietnamese, his parents went to their fortune teller to see when our dates would align. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of like it's just the life that I grew up in. It's my normal.
Okay. Okay. When you visited the psychic, was that, I mean, because it's part of normal life, so I imagine it's like it's not something you were skeptical about, or were you skeptical when she's told you your book would be written and all that stuff?
I was very skeptical. Like
Okay.
I think when my mom would take me to go see the fortune teller when I was younger, it's always like, oh God, here we go again. You know what I mean? Like here we go off to the family
Yeah.
fortune teller. And I think when I was going through a really hard time when I was 27, 26, right? And so I think I saw her to seek comfort, which is something like I saw that as like a comfort thing because I just grew up with it, right? It's like it turns like your favorite soup when you're really sad or you need some comfort. And so I hadn't seen one ever on my own before, of that nature. Like my friends do tarot cards, things like that, whatever. But then I just went to go see this woman just out of like curiosity. And then when I remember when she told me I would publish my book and when I would do it, I remember laughing because I had tried for so long to be an author. It took me like over like 10 years really, right? Like I changed careers, I went to a coding boot camp, I did so many things, and like
Yeah.
every time I wrote a book it didn't go anywhere. And I remember I came back from that trip in Hawaii and I remember thinking to myself like, what am I going to write about? And then I started writing about her. So then that book
Amazing.
took me yeah, I know, isn't that great? It took me 5 years to write Fortunes. And yeah.
Yeah, that's I can really appreciate the guidance you got then, but like not at that moment, right? Like it
Yeah.
was like I wasn't, maybe that was just what you needed to hear at that time to get where you are today.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the other questions that came up was about your writing process. Like maybe you started writing about the psychic, but you said you had written some stories prior to that? Like what was your
Yes.
process like to get to this point to be published?
I have always written about Asian American, Vietnamese American stories, but I actually try to get into young adult first. So I wrote a couple like young adult books, and I tried to get an agent from that. But you know what's interesting? Like I just didn't think back then people were receptive to AAPI stories like at all, and I don't know. I just felt like it was just like a constant churn of rejection, no matter. So but I also wrote like insane stuff. I wrote like dystopia, young adult, like Hunger Games types of books, right? For like, and so I don't know, like, but when I like wrote Fortunes, it was the first time I wrote like an adult contemporary book, and I wrote it from my heart,
Mhm.
because I really had a strong desire to see contemporary Vietnamese American stories,
Yes.
of which I just haven't seen in a very long time or probably ever. And so I sat down to write it. And then when I began looking for an agent, it happened really fast. And I knew things were different because, times have changed. But also, my first agent was Korean American,
Hmm.
and my editor behind the book is Vietnamese American. So I actually have Asian women who like
Yes.
help the book along.
Yeah.
And it's important to have those people behind the scenes because those are the decision makers, basically.
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah,
That they
it's a
brought your
different
vision to
landscape.
life.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then I guess, I say I want to be a writer, but I really don't. Like I have stories, but I don't like writing. If you're like, are you somebody that journals to kind of get some stories, to draw out stories? I just wonder because I don't know what that looks like.
My process is, I mean, it's different for everybody, but I definitely have like, I keep like my notes app is like full of ideas,
Ah,
and I have like a little sketchbook somewhere that's just like full of ideas. But I, God, I'm like always online, like perpetually always online, like Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. So I'm always like pulling ideas from everywhere, just like jotting down ideas
mhm,
wherever. But
mhm.
I've been doing it my like entire life. Yeah, since I was like a kid.
Amazing. And then when you were in Seattle, I remember you saying somewhere else maybe that you did a writing workshop, or was that before or after coding? I can't remember.
So my undergrad degree is actually in journalism. So I'm very, yeah, I'm very like, I was like, oh my God, like you guys picked me, you know? But yeah, it was in journalism, but I didn't make it. And so I was like, oh God, like what am I gonna do for money? But I've always wanted to be a writer. And so I just tried a bunch of different careers. And then I think when I was like 23, 24, I was like, I have to pivot. So I went to coding boot camp and then I went to grad school. And then I just stayed in tech, but I've always kept writing. And oh, okay. So do you know the Richard Hugo House in
Mhm,
Seattle?
I think so. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's like a really big, like independent like writing center in Capitol Hill, but I took classes there for like years, like after work. And I took like a year long like YA course. I took like a really great class. I think it's no longer operating, but my instructor I was with Young Cho, a Korean queer writer, and he read my work and he like really encouraged me to keep going. And then I applied to UW Bothel's MFA program. I got in, and then the first or second week that I was in the program for the MFA program, I got an agent, so I dropped out.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, it's
well,
really, really crazy journey of trying to write, try and do all this stuff. Yeah, I don't know.
yeah, when I hear you say you didn't make it in journalism, I think you're okay. You're doing okay now.
But I really wanted to be like, you know what I mean? Like it's like one of those like young dreams that you have. Like, oh God, I can't wait to like hit the field and write
Yeah,
all these articles. Yeah, yeah.
it's incredible. Well, I'm sure there's some days where you'd be able to still hit the field and doing your exploration and investigation for your
Yeah.
next story, which leads me to ask you, what is next for you?
So right in the middle of throes of like writing it. I'm like halfway through. It's called The Breadwinner, and How Fortunes was about mother-daughter relationships. This is about father-daughter, like daughter relationships.
Okay.
And I'm really fascinated by like uh, the idea of us having to build like generational wealth and that type of like immigrant hustle culture, which I don't really like, but it does. I don't know. It's about all those things about like um, an immigrant family who finds newfound wealth and what happens when the after effects of what that is. But basically, it's about. Do you know Lee sandwiches by
Mhm.
any chance? Yeah,
Vegas?
it's like no, it's like a
Okay.
chain of like Vietnamese um sandwiches on the West Coast.
Oh, okay. I think I've been to one in Vegas. That's why I say that.
Yes, but
That
there
that's
might
not the same.
I think it is at Lee sandwich. Well, they're not actually. There is no Lee's in Washington. I don't think,
Mm-mm.
but it's like a chain of like Vietnamese like fast food.
Okay.
But I'm like it's like loosely based on that concept where the patriarch of like a Vietnamese sandwich chain steps down, and his kids have to fight for their inheritance by turning and revitalizing old like sandwich shops across America and like revitalizing them into like but it's about like like old neighborhoods like little Saigons across the country and like how
Mhm.
do you turn that into like the next generation and make it more modern. Yeah, just like those themes.
I
I'm
love
like that's like really long-winded. I'm like
that.
bad at pitching this idea. But yeah, it's like a lot of different themes. But again, I like chaos. So lots of chaos, lots of characters. Yeah.
Well, I think that's what's so relatable about your book. I mean, if we think about the fortunes of jaded women, and there are a lot of different topics there. I mean, but I think that's whether you're Vietnamese American or Filipino American, I felt like I could relate to a lot of the stories and like the feelings and like especially the eldest daughter guilt and mother-daughter
Yes.
relationship there. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to hear more about a father-daughter relationship and see how that turns out. That's exciting.
Yeah, me too. I hope I finished it. Yeah.
Well, the other piece that I think about when I look at the fortunes of jaded women is just like how there aren't stories like this. Like when I was growing up, for sure, that's centered around
Yes.
an Asian experience or even by Asian authors. And I think that's the thing that I love so much about what we're doing with the Maybelle Project is really amplifying these stories that are either written by Asian folks or are
Mhm.
centered around Asian characters. And so I want to say like my first book that I read that I knew was an Asian author was Helen Zia. And that was like my senior year in high school. Like I didn't
Oh,
even
wow.
know anything like
Yes.
that was written. And then even after that, I would say like the Joy Luck Club was like something that, and
Yes.
it's not necessarily uplifting. And I think where
Yes.
Fortunes of Jaded wins is that Fortunes of Jaded Women wins is in the joy that it brings because of not just the relatable piece, the family piece, but it's something I can see myself or my Vietnamese friends, like that's how their families are.
Yeah. I feel like joy is so rare to see in our stories. Like I feel like it's always like kind of rooted in trauma and like
Yes.
pain and like, and I really want to subvert that and just see a really like joyful story. And they sort of like it's really funny. This one reader DM me, and I will never forget it. It's so funny. She said, "I know this is fiction because my mother would never apologize to me," and I laughed so hard. So I was like, "Yes, I know it's
Oh
fiction,
my
but
gosh, yes.
yes." And I was like, "My mother has never apologized to me either, but like, e- but we in through fiction, through media, through like movies, books, like we can like change those endings to be a happy ending."
Yeah.
And
Yes.
then the more people that see that happy ending, it's like it becomes more ingrained in our culture, right? Like for
Mhm.
like the third generation, the fourth generation, like I'll apologize to my future kids one day
Yep.
if they deserve it. But yeah, you know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, like it's those things that you have to like write your own happy ending. And so I really wanted to give this family a happy ending.
Yes, I love that. And I love that you're paving that way for other people to be able to show and reflect other stories of Asian families that are not centered on trauma. Um, I just want to add a little bit of like when you think about generational wealth and like it's things like maybe our immigrant parents didn't have when they came here and they don't know how to teach us. And I see a
Hmm.
lot more of maybe it's on Instagram or maybe it's on TikTok, but a lot of more people of color that are talking about finances where like I think I still have
Yes.
trouble doing it. So like I think when you come out with a story that actually makes it easier to talk about, like that's just a
Yes.
win for everyone.
Yeah. And I feel like yeah, I it's so like I have like I mean I still have anxiety, but like I had a lot of anxiety throughout my 20s. Like how am I supposed to like retire one day?
Oh my
And it's
gosh.
like, yeah, you never like talk about it. And I didn't my parents were not financially savvy at all. So I think it's just like a big thing that we also have to shoulder as first gen, second gen, like how do we build that for the future? So it's a lot of weight that we
Yeah.
have to bear and people just don't talk about that enough.
Well, my 11-year-old is now asking me when he should start buying a house.
Oh
So
my god.
I'm like, hold up, boy, hold up. Let's get you through college. He's like, well, should I just buy one out of college or out of high school? I'm like, what? Doesn't work that way all the time, kid. Um, we're talking about and having those conversations, and so like it's important. So I appreciate you keeping that momentum going.
Is there anything that like you want to add that we are missing that you would like us to share? I
Oh
always
my
ask that.
gosh. I want readers to take away that this book really is about like generational healing as well. And
Mm,
so like and I feel like I just want to encourage people to say like things always become better at the end. You just can't see it now, but they will eventually. Maybe it's like really far down the end of the tunnel, but eventually we all get there. So
yeah.